It would begin quietly, as all buried sins do, a single question whispered in the sterile corridors of Los Angeles Memorial Hospital, the kind of question that shouldn't exist in a place built on healing. How did Luna Nozawa, a young woman branded as unstable and manipulative, acquire the prescription drugs that later fueled her spiral? The official story, now accepted by half the city, was that she'd stolen them, that her descent into obsession was self-inflicted. But what if the drugs weren't stolen? What if they had been given to her long before the world knew her name, sanctioned, monitored, and forgotten by the same institution that now condemned her? It was this thread that an ambitious young journalist tugged at, and with that one act, the pristine fabric of the Finnegan legacy began to unravel. Luna's story had always been an uneasy collision between tragedy and scandal. To the public, she was the woman who wrecked homes and lives. To her few defenders, she was a lost soul whose pain had been exploited by every system that touched her. When she died, or appeared to, her name became shorthand for chaos. Yet behind the spectacle of headlines and court cases was a quieter truth that no one had ever bothered to examine. Years earlier, before her notoriety, Luna had been a patient, a volunteer in a psychiatric drug trial supervised by none other than Dr. Lee Finnegan's hospital. The study had promised breakthroughs in treating trauma-related disorders, a cocktail of neurochemical stabilizers meant to rewire emotional response patterns. Officially, it had been shut down after unexpected side effects in several participants. Unofficially, it had been buried, sealed under non-disclosure agreements and corporate money. Finn had been there too, still a medical resident, wide-eyed and idealistic, shadowing Lee's department for his rotation in neurobehavioral research. He remembered Luna then, not as the volatile woman she would become, but as a quiet, almost fragile young patient whose laughter seemed to belong to another life. She had joined the trial after a string of panic attacks and depressive episodes following her mother's abandonment. Her file had described her as emotionally unstable but highly responsive to treatment. Back then, Finn had barely noticed her beyond the usual metrics of empathy and distance that medicine demanded. He had drawn her blood, adjusted her noted her vitals, mechanical acts of care without knowing they would someday define his conscience. When the first signs of psychological fracture appeared among participants, Finn was there too, watching in confusion as patients who once smiled now trembled with paranoia, hearing voices or slipping into rage without warning. Lee, ever the perfectionist, had insisted that the drug compound was safe, that the symptoms were coincidence, that their hospital's reputation could not afford another failure. Medicine is perception, she had said once, eyes sharp with the conviction of someone who'd built her entire career on immaculate control. If they think we've lost control, we lose everything. The trial was closed. The records were sealed. The patients were quietly transferred, discharged, or, in Luna's case, released back into the world with no explanation. Years later, when Luna's name began appearing in tabloids, when she started breaking laws and hearts with equal ferocity, Lee recognized her immediately. The haunted eyes, the erratic behavior, the flashes of brilliance and despair, they were the echoes of that failed experiment. It wasn't guilt that drove Lee to hide the truth, it was survival. She couldn't allow decades of professional triumph to be tainted by one misjudgment. So when Luna turned up half dead after one of her breakdowns, Lee did what she had done for Finn once. She saved her. Quietly, off the books, in a rented medical suite under an alias. She told herself it was compassion, but deep down she knew it was containment. Because if Luna ever remembered who had prescribed her that first drug, everything would come undone. Now, with Luna's supposed death still lingering in the media, the journalist's discovery threatened to reopen the grave she had never truly left. The old files resurfaced, corrupted, redacted, but still damning. Trial logs signed by Lee. Digital timestamps showing Finn's attendance. Notes referencing emotional deregulation, hallucinations, and aggression. The pieces fit too perfectly. The tragedy of Luna Nozawa wasn't spontaneous. It was manufactured, the byproduct of ambition masquerading as innovation. Finn found out the way good men always do by accident. He had gone to the hospital archives searching for unrelated records, only to stumble across the journalist's preliminary report attached to his name. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the data, his own signature staring back at him from forms he had barely remembered signing. Each entry was a ghost, Luna's name beside vitals, her patient ID linked to coded trial results. The more he read, the more he felt the sterile air closing in. How many times had he walked past her room, offering comfort he didn't understand? How many warnings had he ignored because his mother told him to trust the process? When he confronted Lee, the confrontation was volcanic. She didn't deny it. She simply told him to stop. "You don't understand what's at stake," she said, her voice steady but her eyes desperate. "That girl was sick long before we met her. We tried to help her. We failed. End of story." But Finn couldn't accept that. He had spent his life defining himself in opposition to Sheila Carter, to the legacy of manipulation and moral decay she represented. Now he saw that the line he had drawn between good and evil was a fiction. His mother had done the same thing Sheila had always done: decide who was worth saving and who could be sacrificed for the greater good. The moral paralysis that followed was worse than rage. If he exposed Lee, he would destroy her career, perhaps her freedom. The hospital would fall under federal investigation, lawsuits would multiply, and the Finnegan name, his name, would become synonymous with scandal. But if he stayed silent, he would become complicit in Luna's ruin, another doctor hiding behind ethics while a woman's life was torn apart. The truth wasn't abstract anymore. It was alive, crying out from every line of Luna's file. She wasn't just a villain or a patient. She was a casualty of a system that treated trauma as data and profit as virtue. Steffi noticed the change first. Finn stopped sleeping, stopped talking during dinner, his mind always somewhere distant. When she pressed, he lied at first, something about overwork, patient stress, the usual excuses. But Steffi knew when the man she loved was unraveling. Eventually, the truth spilled out in fragments. The trial, Luna, Lee's involvement. The horror in Steffi's eyes wasn't just for what had happened. It was for what it meant. "If you go public," she whispered, "it won't just destroy Lee. It'll destroy us." Forrester backed every story about Luna's mental instability. "If the media finds out we used her records to smear her, they'll come for us too." That was the second trap. Forrester Creations, in its desperate attempt to distance itself from Luna's chaos, had relied heavily on medical sources provided by Lee's hospital, sanitized psychological assessments that painted Luna as irredeemable. The irony was cruel. The company that condemned her might have been responsible for creating her. And now, Finn stood at the center of a storm that could tear down everything: his mother's reputation, his wife's empire, his own integrity. In the weeks that followed, he tried to balance both worlds, to be a husband, a doctor, a son, and a conscience, but the weight of silence grew unbearable. He began visiting the old research wing late at night, searching through locked drawers and encrypted files. Each discovery deepened the wound. Luna's intake notes, her recorded sessions, the slow, documented descent from hope to horror. In one video, a younger Finn asked her how she was feeling. "Better," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Like the noise in my head is quieter. But sometimes I think it's not gone. It's just hiding." Then, almost as if predicting the years to come, she added softly, "If it comes back, promise you'll remember that I tried to be good." He couldn't unhear those words. They became the refrain of his conscience. He began dreaming of her, of that hospital room bathed in the blue light of monitors, of her eyes flickering between lucidity and madness. He saw her not as the monster the world painted, but as the patient he had failed. Meanwhile, the journalists' investigation gained traction. Lawsuits were drafted. Anonymous sources began leaking fragments of the trial to rival networks. Forrester's PR team scrambled to discredit the claims, spinning the narrative that Luna's instability was innate, not induced. Bill Spencer, sensing blood, started maneuvering to control the media fallout, perhaps even weaponize it against Forrester. And through it all, Finn became the unwilling centerpiece of every rumor, the whistleblower who might save or destroy them all. When the subpoena finally arrived, demanding his testimony, Finn stood at a crossroads no medical training could prepare him for. Lee begged him to stay silent, reminding him of everything she had sacrificed for him: the years, the reputation, the legacy. "I saved you once," she said. "Don't undo everything I built." But Finn wasn't a child anymore. He had spent his life believing in healing, in redemption, in truth. And now, for the first time, he understood that truth wasn't pure. It was surgical, a blade that could cure or kill depending on where it cut. He thought of Luna, of how she must have felt when the world turned her into a headline, of how easily people had decided she was mad, dangerous, disposable. He thought of the moment Lee had chosen to save her, not out of love, but guilt, and how even that act of mercy had been twisted into secrecy. And then he thought of the future, of what it meant to raise his own children in a world where silence was virtue. In the end, he chose neither silence nor spectacle. He drafted a statement, clinical and unembellished, acknowledging his role in the trial, admitting the ethical breaches, naming the institutions, but not his mother. He sent it to the press himself and signed, anonymous, a whisper of truth rather than a scream. It was enough to ignite inquiry, but not enough to destroy. It was his compromise, a wound reopened not to bleed, but to heal. When the news broke, Los Angeles trembled. The Finnegan name faltered, but did not fall. Forrester scrambled to repair its image. Lee withdrew from public life, retreating into the same silence she had once imposed on others. And somewhere, in a dim apartment near the city's edge, a woman with Luna's eyes read the headlines and smiled faintly. The world thought she was dead, but now it was paying attention. That was the cruel beauty of truth. It didn't save anyone. It simply changed the game. Finn knew he would spend the rest of his life balancing its cost. But for the first time, he could look at himself in the mirror and see not perfection, not redemption, but honesty. And maybe that was enough. Because in the end, Luna Nozawa's story was never just about madness or manipulation. It was about what happens when medicine becomes morality, when care becomes commerce, and when the ones sworn to heal learn that every cure has a price, and every secret, eventually, demands to be found. It was meant to be a resurrection, a day when Los Angeles's most glamorous family would wash its sins in sunlight and call it love. Hope Logan stood before the mirror, her reflection wrapped in ivory silk and forgiveness, the Forrester estate gleaming with floral perfection. Liam Spencer waited at the altar, a man reborn, his practiced smile hiding the exhaustion of 1,000 second chances. Around them, the audience of family, friends, and press gathered like witnesses to an ending they all pretended was a beginning. The music swelled, the cameras flashed, and Hope told herself that this wedding, this union rebuilt from ashes, would prove that peace was possible. But as every soul in that church was about to learn, peace built on silence is only a pause before judgment. Outside, the world was already unraveling. The Spencer-Forrester alliance had survived too many scandals to count: affairs, betrayals, custody battles, and whispered cover-ups. But none of it had sunk as deep into their collective conscience as Luna Nozawa's death. For months, her name had been scrubbed from headlines, her face buried beneath charity galas and soft-focus family interviews. Bill Spencer had ordered it, Brooke Logan had rationalized it, and Hope had agreed, quietly, painfully, that the world didn't need to know more. Luna was gone. Will's involvement, the night they'd shared, the confusion that had followed, all of it was sealed under the illusion of compassion. "We've all suffered enough," Brooke had told her daughter. "Let it rest." But ghosts have no respect for etiquette, and Luna's ghost had found her way home. The morning of the ceremony, the sky over Beverly Hills hung heavy and gray. Hope tried to ignore the omen. She smiled through makeup touch-ups, listened to Brooke's rehearsed blessings, and told herself that she was doing the right thing, giving her son stability, giving her heart permission to believe in love again. Liam, ever the pragmatist, saw the day as a reset button for his own guilt. "It's about closure," he said, kissing her hand before the ceremony. About showing the world we've moved on. Hope smiled back, but inside, she heard a whisper, Luna's voice, from an old tabloid video, trembling and furious. You can't move on from what you never faced. By noon, the church was a tableau of perfection. Donna arranged the floral arches with trembling hands, Eric adjusted his tie, and Rich murmured to Brooke that it finally feels right. Even Bill, seated in the front pew beside Katie, looked almost human in his restraint. Only Will seemed uneasy, his gaze flicking to the cameras that dotted the nave. He had begged his father not to turn the wedding into a PR spectacle, but Bill had brushed it off. The world needs to see that we're whole again, he said. The world would see something, all right, just not what he expected. As the organist began the processional, a low hum echoed through the church's speakers. A brief, almost imperceptible glitch. The guests exchanged polite smiles, assuming it was feedback. Hope began her walk down the aisle, every step measured, luminous, a symbol of survival. Liam's eyes met hers, full of practiced devotion. But as she reached the altar, the hum returned, louder this time, followed by the sharp crackle of static. The music stopped. The massive projection screen, meant to display a live feed of the ceremony for the guests outside, flickered. Then, abruptly, it went black. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the image appeared. A dim, gray room, concrete walls, a metal table, the unmistakable hum of a security camera. And in the center, Luna Nozawa, alive. Or so it seemed. Her hair was shorter, her face hollowed, her hands trembling as she clutched something unseen. Please, she said, her voice raw and broken. Please, if you're watching this, tell me my child is alive. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Hope froze. Liam's hand gripped hers instinctively, as if to anchor her to reality. Then came the voice, distorted, mechanical, genderless. This is the truth you buried. It said, each syllable drawn out like a sentence. You called her a monster. You called her unstable. But you never asked why. The night she begged for help, you turned away. You told her to disappear. And now, you wear white, pretending purity, while her blood still stains your silence. The screen shifted again. Flashes of documents, hospital forms with Lee Finnegan's signature, psychiatric notes marked confidential, and a single name repeated in bold red font, Will Spencer. The crowd murmured louder now, confusion giving way to horror. The footage showed blurred figures, Luna and Will, in what appeared to be a hospital corridor, an embrace half-lit by security lights. He was the only one who listened. Luna's voice whispered from the recording. He promised to protect me. Hope's sneeze nearly buckled. She heard her own breath catch, saw Brooke rise from her seat, her face pale. Bill stood, furious, demanding that the projection be shut down, but the technicians could only shake their heads. The feed wasn't coming from them. Someone had hacked the system. Someone had planned this. The distorted voice returned, colder now. The Forrester, Logan, Spencer alliance built empires on lies. You claimed moral superiority while burying a woman who needed help. You condemned her for the chaos you created. And you called it justice. By then, chaos had replaced ceremony. Reporters outside began to swarm the steps, sensing scandal in the air. Guests whispered, some filming on their phones despite Eric's desperate pleas to stop. Hope could feel the walls closing in, the weight of judgment pressing down on her. Every vow she had written, every word about forgiveness and truth, now mocked her. Because the truth, Luna's truth, was alive, weaponized, and merciless. Liam tried to speak, but she pulled her hand away. Her mind was a storm. Memories of that night, the arguments, the choice to remain silent. Luna had called, hysterical, claiming she was being followed, that she feared for her baby's life. Hope had dismissed it as another manipulation. Everyone had. It was easier to believe she was dangerous than to admit they had failed her. And now, on the day meant to absolve them, the evidence of their complicity was being broadcast like scripture. The footage ended as abruptly as it began, replaced by a single phrase, written in stark white letters. No body. No peace. Then the screen went dark. The church erupted into noise, shouts, gasps, phones ringing. Hope's bouquet fell from her trembling hands. Across the aisle, Steffi's eyes darted toward Finn, whose expression was unreadable, almost haunted. Brooke clung to Ridge, whispering that it had to be fake, that someone was trying to destroy them. But deep down, they all knew whoever had orchestrated this wasn't lying. They were exposing what everyone had chosen to forget. Bill stormed toward the control booth, barking orders, demanding to know who had access to the footage. But when he saw the still frame frozen on the monitor, Luna's tear-streaked face, her plea for her child, even his fury faltered. For years, he had justified every cover-up as protection for his family, especially Will. But this wasn't protection anymore. It was desecration. The ghosts of his own choices were staring back at him. And for once, there was no spin, no corporate statement, no PR strategy that could save him. Outside, social media exploded. Within minutes, hashtags flooded every platform. Justice for Luna, the wedding hack, Forrester Files. Networks interrupted programming to replay the footage, each outlet speculating whether Luna had been alive when it was recorded, whether the Spencer family had silenced her, whether the child she mentioned still existed. Forrester's PR department, paralyzed, issued a single statement, no comment. Back inside the church, the ceremony was abandoned. Guests dispersed under the flashing lights of arriving media vans. Liam tried to follow Hope, but she stopped him at the doors. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Not when everything we've built is built on her grave." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "You told me to move on," she said, her eyes wet. "But you can't move on from what you never faced." Maybe that's what she's telling us. Later that night, the footage played on every screen in the city. Experts analyzed Luna's words, lip readers claimed she was speaking to someone off camera, and conspiracy theorists dissected every glitch and pixel. But for those who knew the truth, who had lived it, the impact was more personal, more unbearable. In her office, Brooke watched the looped broadcast in silence. She saw herself reflected in Luna's eyes, the same pride, the same fear, the same refusal to see the damage her control had caused. Donna tried to comfort her, but Brooke couldn't be consoled. "We thought we were protecting the family," she murmured. "All we did was destroy another one." Bill, alone in his penthouse, poured a drink he didn't touch. He thought of Will, his son, his legacy, and wondered what kind of man he was turning him into. The voice from the broadcast replayed in his head. "You called her a monster." He had. And now, the monster was not Luna. It was the mirror of his own arrogance. Hope spent the night driving with no destination. Her wedding dress was still on, its hem dirty, her makeup streaked. She ended up at the cliffs above Malibu, where the ocean devoured the horizon. The wind howled like penance. She thought of Luna's voice, the tremor, the desperation, the simple plea to know if her child lived. She had ignored that plea. Out of fear, out of loyalty, out of selfishness. And now, she was the one standing trial, not in a courtroom, but in her own soul. By dawn, every network in the country carried a new headline. Was Luna Nozawa silenced? The Forrester, Spencer scandal reignites. The family scrambled into damage control mode, summoning lawyers, deleting statements, blaming hackers. But the truth was already free. It had left the church with every guest who saw that screen, with every phone that recorded it, with every whisper that turned into a reckoning. The wedding that was meant to heal had become a funeral for denial. And in the quiet that followed, one question lingered in every heart. If Luna had survived long enough to record that video, where was she now? And if her child had lived, the child born of the night the Spencers swore to forget, then no amount of power, money, or marriage vows could ever hide what was coming next. Because in the city of the beautiful and the damned, ghosts never rest until the truth is paid in full.